All right, afternoon, everybody. Uh, we don't have a formal presentation this week, but like we've done in the past, this is going to be perfSONAR office hours, starring Andy and Mark, and probably Phil, since I'm sure he has questions that he'd like to ask. Um, but what we'll just do is sort of treat it like open call for questions. If you have one and you want to raise your hand, we can acknowledge you that way, or you can just unmute and ask your question, or type it into the chat, whatever works. But for this period of time, person on our team is here to either help steer you through things that maybe you have questions on, or if you want to give them suggestions of future work, or if you want to see them do demos. Pretty much anything goes. So I'll turn it over to Mark and Andy to get us started.
All right. Hi, everyone. Um,
Hello.
yeah, so as Jason says, if you haven't been to one of these before, it's pretty free form. We don't really come with an agenda, so just feel free to fire away with questions, whether that be in the chat or if you just want to unmute and ask us, we're pretty good with that. Um, just maybe to prime the pump a little bit, uh, and give a little status update on what Persona is up to these days. Like right now, we're in the midst of a beta for version 5.2.0. I know Phil, who's on, has definitely tested it because he's put some issues in. um, but yeah, if anybody's had a chance to play around with that and has any questions or anything, weird that they've observed with that, that's always a good topic to talk about as well. We've got a few more issues we need to tackle on that, but hopefully in the next few weeks we'll have that in final state. But it's always helpful to get input on that as well. So that said, I guess I'll open the floor.
Could be a very quiet one. Maybe we could switch the format up and we'll ask the attendees questions. All right. Well, while we're waiting for a question, I'll mention a couple of things that have happened recently with the auto installer script. Made a couple of changes to it, and they're all in the help when you run help. But Phil has started a question. Um, but anyway, we've done a couple of things. There's a new bundle you can install called None that installs no bundle, and that's handy if you want to just do some sort of custom things with the add switch to install a few packages. The other thing that we've done, and this is, as I just mentioned, we have this switch called add, which if you install a bundle and there are some other things that you want to add, for example, like when I build an archive, I tend to build the archive bundle and I add the Grafana bundle just with the add switch and I just name the package and that gets both on in one shot. So um, all right, Phil has a question. What's the state of ls registration daemon.conf? That sounds like a you question.
Yeah, do you have kind of more specific, something weird you're seeing with the LS registration demon? I can actually say a couple things about the future of that piece of software and things like that, but I also don't want to.
Sure. Just can you hear me?
Yeah, yep, I can hear
Okay,
you.
okay. Just that my use of toolkit, whenever I try to fill it out, it accepts it, but when I come back to it, it's empty again. If I put in a file, if I put the file in the right place with the right permissions, it stays there and it shows, but I can't really create it again. Also, I think the idea of that additional information is to be able to go to the stats that perfsonar.net page and find other locations. It seems like there aren't many locations showing up there anymore. And of those locations that show up, not all of them are really accepting tests. And so I particularly were looking for where 100 gig test site and I've been able to find one. I've used some of the ESNet ones and some of the I2 ones, but you have parameters of only testing up to 30 gig or something like that, which is fine. And I understand that, but I'm sure that other universities have a 100 gig system just waiting for traffic and I can't find it. So
Yeah.
those are the questions I have about it.
Yeah, so we actually are doing a bunch of work on the lookup service and the LS registration daemon in 5.3, which I think we're hopeful will be out in some form by the end of the year. So that's after 5.2, which is in beta right now. So a couple things to unpack there. So to first order, like the Alice registration daemon should still work, right? And there's still kind of, I'm just looking at stats.perfSONAR.net. There's still like the few thousand hosts there that have always been there. But what you kind of just described has kind of long been a problem where like there's a lot of hosts there. It's hard to tell who you can test to and who you can't, right? You basically have to do trial and error, and not all of them will accept your tests, or they'll be firewalled off or whatever. Um, and then I was looking, and again, too, like it's kind of, I can't remember if we auto detect the interface speed or not. I think we do, but I don't think there's a great way to search for that on this page, if I remember correctly. So I agree that that could be a little tricky. Some of it is on the back end, just the way we format some of that stuff. It can be a little bit difficult to search and navigate. So we're actually refactoring all of that in 5.3 to make it a lot simpler. And that work is actually pretty far along at this point. So we're starting to kind of test with that. And as part of that too, we'll be or I think again it's kind of mostly done. We'll be re-implementing the LS registration daemon for that information. Um, Now to kind of go to the more kind of um, immediate thing you mentioned, that is a little strange. That so you were basically saying the LS registration daemon on the toolkit, it starts off, it has stuff in it, but at some point it just like gets erased or goes blank. Is that what you were saying?
No, when I uh, define a user and then go visit the configuration,
Oh, okay, from the UI.
the UI, and I put information into the form
Okay.
and then hit save, it says it's saved. And then I go set up some tests and they're saved. And I come back to looking at the LS registration page. It's
Got it.
empty.
Okay. And then you said you edited the file permissions on the lsregistrationdaemon.conf
No,
and
no, I have a standard one that I have from long ago. I put it in the right place and et cetera, something or other.
Mhm.
And then it keeps it. So I can go to the page, the information page, and the data appears there now, unlike it didn't appear before. Am I making sense?
Yep, you are. So it sounds like
Okay.
maybe we need to add a bug to look at the LS registration daemon.com. I mean, it smells of like a file permissions issue or something, or a
Yeah, it
SE
does. Yeah.
issue with editing that file from the UI. Um, so we probably just need to look into something weird going on there, because it sounds like it's telling you it's saved, but it didn't actually save. And so then when you reload the page, it's just blank again because it didn't actually save the data. Um, so yeah, we should I'm writing a note of that. We should create a bug and then take a look at that.
Yeah, also sounds like maybe it's trying to write the file and it's not detecting that it can or something. So
To be honest, I don't think this is a new bug. I think it's been there for a while. And if I were to guess, I would guess that's why there are fewer and fewer sites on the stats page because nobody can put the stats on the page anymore.
oh, that could be.
Just a comment from the bleachers.
I
Mark
mean,
knows about my comments from the bleachers.
I will say that the host count is pretty consistent on the stats page. So I think stuff is still getting registered. They just can't add, if that would prevent people from adding additional information.
Yeah, it's 2,354 hosts are registered right now. So that seems to be about where it usually is. But we'll take a look at what's broken.
But
So, and it wouldn't surprise me a bit if that's an old bug because we have a few of those floating around.
yeah, and I mean the reason we're ripping out that code too is there's some really crufty code in that between that UI and that file that just needs to go. So in that UI and that file too. It's inclusive. Um, so yeah. Okay, yeah, thanks. That's helpful. Did I cover everything? I think you had a few things in there. Um,
Yeah, you got it. Thanks.
There's another question in chat from Matt Bidwell that probably you should answer because it's ESNet.
yeah, the significance of the number in the ESNet perfSONAR endpoints. I'm trying to, so I'm not sure which number you're referring to. So, historically, we used to label everything, like the throughput interface was dash PT1. But we changed that recently, so the interfaces are dash TP for throughput and dash lat. I think the only numbers I can think of in the host names are certain sites are in like different buildings. So like there's LBNL 59, for example, which is in building 59 at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, and there's LBNL 50, which is in building 50. And I think there's a few variations of that at other sites. Is that the number you're referring to, or are you referring to something else? Sorry if I'm.
Yeah, but I don't know the significance of that number. Like, is that the number their HPC data center is? I don't know. It's not super clear like what endpoint I would test against.
Yeah, I'll be honest, it's not always super clear to me because I don't know every site. Usually it's building numbers. But I guess if there's a specific one you have a question about, always feel free to like reach out to like myself or Jason or someone, and we can help clarify that. I don't know a good way to necessarily distinguish those. So, and
Yeah, I mean, there's another one that's coming to my mind. I think we have two at CERN, where one of them is in one building and one of them is in another. And that's really the only thing that's different about them, Matt. I mean, honestly, they
Yeah,
would both use the same wide area paths. They would just differ in local paths to a site itself. So I think from a testing perspective, you could use either.
yep.
I figured, and I usually just test whatever one came up first on a manual test.
And then let's see, sorry, what was the okay, yeah, sorry, that was the second part of your test. Is what location? Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing too is, I mean, when you're testing something out like that, and you get to the point where it comes down to one building versus another, that's probably also the point where you should drop the person somebody at the other end of the line and say, "Hey, I'm troubleshooting, and where do we go next?" Man, quiet crowd today. I guess it's the beginning of summer.
I mean, more of a comment, but I noticed like people started being able to put pictures in the sort of part for perfs on our dashboard.
Yeah, that's a thing we're doing for our 20th anniversary, which is this year.
Yeah, so there's actually a Google form that people can fill out if they want to associate themselves or their organization with their host. And so yeah, we're trying to kind of build that map out throughout the year. I need to find the pointer to that. I'm actually noticing we should probably have a pointer to that on the stats.personar.net as well, where the map is getting shown currently. Yeah, so just kind of a fun thing we're doing for the anniversary.
All right. We have another one from Jeff Wilson, who says he's familiar with the premise of perfSONAR, but lack practice running a node. Needs some pointers on how to get off the ground with my recently configured node. Well, I think probably the best place to start, and I guess it kind of depends, Jeff. If it sort of depends on what you're after. If you're looking to um, join up with a community that's doing measurement, like like the WLCG, or you want to just do things on campus, or to things that you know, researchers on your campus are, other sites that your researchers on campus are sending data to and from. Um, Probably the best thing to do would just be to just run some tests by hand to get familiar with what the thing can do. And there's a whole bunch of reference material in the documentation, about what the tests are, what the measurements are, and what the test parameters for those are. Um, and then the next thing to do, I think, is to kind of just sit down and figure out figure out what it is you think you need to measure and what things in your network that those measurements will help you find problems with. Um, so that's kind of the half non-answer, I guess. Let's see. I'm trying to think where else. Any other ideas where we could point them, Andy?
No, I mean, I think that's pretty good.
I mean,
It-
if nothing else, pull up the lookup service and go find a couple of open nodes and run some round trip times and some throughputs and things like that, just to sort of get a feel for how everything is put together. And you can unmute, by the way. We're totally informal with this, so feel free to crack it open and ask follow-ups if you need to.
Yeah, I'm having a rookie tech day here. I can't figure out how to get my AirPods on my wife's computer, so I'm using my phone for the audio. But then I'm watching the video on the computer. So anyhow, frustrations aside, I'm kind of uh, drowning in an overabundance of information. Just need an index for where do you go for where do the noobs go to try to figure out how to get on board with this 20-year established testing platform.
Yeah. I mean, this kind of be a little bit of a repeat of what I said before, but there is a certain, I mean, it's a tool, obviously, and you kind of have to know what you want to do with it. I have a couple out in my toolbox that I bought and didn't really know what I was going to use them for. But generally speaking, this wasn't installed as I know there are several grants that require that you install a persona node. Was that one of those, or are you just trying to get your feet wet, see what it's about?
Well, path validation. I mean, I'm actually trying to use it what it's designed for, just to establish a minimum bandwidth or
Oh, okay.
just that we have connectivity at scale to wherever we need it.
Okay.
I'm familiar with what it's supposed to be able to do. I'm just not quite sure where to go to figure out how to make it do the thing.
Oh, okay. I think we have a couple of tutorials on our YouTube channel that just talk about how to use the command line interface and things. That might be a good place to start. Um, and yeah, the documentation is a little dense because I think it's a little more reference oriented versus being, versus how to oriented. And maybe we can consider doing something about that. Um, but generally speaking, do you think you might install more of these in the future? That's another question.
Uh, Somewhat contingent on proving success with
How
the
things
initial
do with the
node.
first one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, yeah. So I think so. So I think some just sort of rough ideas of how things are going on, or how things are going. Um, Start with find out some of the other campuses that yours exchanges data with. Run throughput between you and them. Learn how to do that. Um, Learn how to do that manually at the command line. It's a good place to kind of tinker a little bit and experiment with different things. And then once you've done that, and you can also do things like if you just want to see if you have connectivity at all to things, round trip time is good for that. A lot of people like to look at, excuse me, at the path between where they are and where they're going, see how those change over time, because those usually tend to reveal things like changes in routing or problems that are related to that. And then once you've done that, so I think that's sort of the first piece to bite off. And then once you've done that, probably the next thing to do would be to put together, I mean, you only have one machine, but put together basically a mesh configuration, which will enable doing that stuff on a regular basis. What you may also want to do is install, we have a pair of bundles. One is called the archive bundle, which is for storing the results long term, and the other is the Grafana bundle, which lets you take a look at the things, take a look at that data over time. Um, but excuse me.
Yeah. So I'm guessing your single host is a toolkit, right? So you already have the
Oh,
archive
you'll have that.
Grafana stuff for that. So not to completely counter what Mark said, but if you don't want to start with a command line, I
Yeah,
did
that's fair too.
well, I put a couple links in chat. One is to the specific doc page that kind of walks through how to use the UI to configure tests, which it looks like you've already gotten some, I see some tests here, right? That got looks like some throughput going potentially, and some ping tests and or sorry, ping and trace route going, um, and things like that. So that's a good spot to start. And then the second link is like, okay, if you want to like find some interesting places to test to, like looks like you've got Wisconsin in here. The stats.perfsonar.net is kind of the place to go with listings of hosts, and you can try and search around that. To find interesting places. Usually, interesting is going to depend on the use case, right? So if you have places you are, do a lot of transfers to, or are close to your border, or will exercise particular aspects of your network that you want exercised, or your user experience, that's usually the best place to start. As Mark said, like once maybe once you played around with it with the UI and kind of doing smaller setups like this, if you want to do bigger setups, then there's some tools and like a different doc page that kind of walks through how to basically set up a bunch of nodes um, that are just capable of doing the testing part. They don't necessarily all need the UI and the place to store the data and how to kind of centrally store that. But that, sounds like you're still at the kind of getting your feet wet stage. So that's probably not quite what you're worried about yet. So
Yeah, the feet are quite dry at this point.
yeah,
Well, come on in. The water's fine.
yeah. And like generally speaking too, like if you need lots of different locations, like the internet too, or the ESNet hosts, obviously Mark and I will be biased towards those. Those are good ones to choose. Like they're running, they should let your tests in. You know who to call if they don't. So that might be a good starting point as well.
Yeah, our stuff is in a little bit of a state of flux at the moment, so
Oh, okay.
it's not a wonderful choice. So
Okay.
I'll
Well, then
I'll
maybe just be
suggest the
ESNet
SNet.
stuff. So
Yeah, I mean, and there's tons of stuff that you can test too. I mean, even you can see how long it takes your university's website to respond to a request. There's a whole bunch of sort of little nuts and bolts things like tests for whether or not DNS works and a few other things. Um, and those are just sort of nice, is the internet turned on type things that are good to look at too. If you want to start real basic, you can start with that, because that's just sort of, kind of basic service verification for the things on your campus to see if they work. And then you can start figuring out, where you want to do kind of, more complicated measurements like throughput or path or anything else like that.
Um, I've got a real oddball question for you.
We'll give you the most oddball answer we can come up with.
Okay. What about testing other path attributes, like particularly V6 and um, uh, uh, extended packet headers and things like that?
So you're talking about things like the packet tagging you do for for different types of traffic and things.
No, I'm
Or
talking about adding V6 has an extended header format.
Oh, right.
But a lot of places filter it, or it's filtered a lot. A lot of providers generally filter it, but a lot of networks don't intentionally filter it, but it gets filtered because they have um, either a firewall or they have an ACL that has to look um, at the UDP or TCP header.
Oh, I
And,
got it. Okay.
and if you add extended headers in, that moves, and the router then has to traverse the whole. So basically, I'm looking at, can we do extension headers?
So yeah,
So
okay. So I guess so what you're actually trying to measure is whether or not those things work. Is that
yeah,
okay? All right. So basically the bottom line for us, and I mean, in a lot of ways, perfSONAR is a big integration project,
yep,
because a lot of the things that we use to do measurement, things like, iPer3 or traceroute or anything else like that,
yep,
are just are tools that other people wrote that we integrated. We do occasionally write our own tools for certain things, and of course, we maintain, OAMP and TWAMP and all that kind of stuff.
uh-huh.
If there are tools out there that can detect that, I mean, that's getting a tool that can figure that out is sort of is probably
So
75
the
to
the
80% of
the
it.
path forward would be get a tool and that does that, and we could work with you
Absolutely.
to
Yeah.
integrate that into the test suite.
Yeah. And we're always,
Okay.
and that was one of the big shifts when we first introduced P-Scheduler back in 17, was that it makes it incredibly easy to do that sort of stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, by all means, if there, I mean, and even,
Because the
even,
reality is right now, the only way anybody tests this stuff is by, um, you know, custom packets built by hand
mhm,
and sent through, through custom scripts. And I thought what you just said is the case, that what we really need is a general tool that can
yeah,
do this, and then you can integrate it in and schedule it and set up a bunch of tests to go to
yep,
all sorts of
yeah,
a
absolutely.
list of places and things like that.
Yeah, I mean it's so and this is just sort of, I mean, Andy may feel differently about this, but my take on this is that the perfSONAR team is not really in the tool business, because there are, like for example, I'm sure you probably know exactly what it is you're trying to measure, and you probably understand it better than we do.
Well, I wish I did,
Or
and I
or
don't, but that's
well,
okay.
okay, you probably know more than me about that
All,
specifically, which
all,
makes
all I
which makes
all
you
I
the
know
expert in the
is
room.
that it needs measuring.
Yeah.
If we're going
Um,
to be successful in doing anything with it, it needs measuring.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and I mean, and to measure it, we just need a tool to do it.
yeah.
You know.
And then perfSONAR is on my, need to measure something. perfSONAR is the first place I look.
Yeah. And even if it's something that's kind of not on our dance card, like I
Yeah.
said, I mean, I'll give you an example. I was at supercomputing one year, and I needed to develop a way to see if there were any hosts on a subnet that were up. Um, and it was, the options were anything on the subnet at all, or anything other than the gateway that was up. And I basically spent like an afternoon. I developed a whole new tested tool for that, and the tool was just back-ended with Nmap, but it got the job done for us. Um, so I mean, it's as long as the measurement is well understood, and there's a tool to do it, then integrating it's not hard.
Uh-huh. Okay.
So yeah, by all means, we are always looking for new things to measure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And while
There was
you guys
sort
are
there was sort of this big blast of things, from like 17 to a few years
Uh,
ago, and it's sort of tapered off a lot since.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was actually just trying to poke around to some of the tools we currently have just to see if any had options like this, even like ping or
uh-huh.
trace. If you could set the V6 extension header and like or iPerf3, because
Yeah.
like I'm thinking in particular like iPerf3, the ESNet maintains that. So we could potentially make an issue and see how Bruce and Sarah, who are the maintainers, feel about adding some of that. Because I do think this is interesting. Actually, like one of the first issues I remember it because it was like one of the first things I ran into when I was like an intern at Internet 2 a zillion years
Uh-huh.
ago was a variation of this problem. Basically, old iPerf, then when you tested on V6, if it had to fragment, it was using the fragmentation extension header, and basically we're running into places where, basically
Yes.
what you described, where things were expecting UDP or TCP to be there. This was this extension header, and they were just like dropping it on the floor,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
basically.
yeah, yeah. Well,
Yep.
fragmentation is
Yeah.
extension headers is how fragmentation is implemented.
Yep.
Um, which is one of the reasons fragmentation in V6 is so horrible.
Right.
And so, and pretty much everybody's given up on fragmentation for V6.
Yeah, I mean, even at that time, I remember basically everything said don't do fragmentation with V6.
Yeah.
But if you have to, there's this fragmentation extension header. Right. So
Yeah. I mean, and actually, and it's funny you should mention iPerf, Andy, because I was just having a discussion with somebody about about not trying to divine what the system did based on what the way iPerf behaved. I think it was a question of figuring out whether systems preferred V4 or V6. And I was like, instead of trying to divine that, why don't we just write a tool to figure it out and and integrate it? So, um, so yeah, all that stuff is definitely possible, and we are quite happy to work with people who have tools they understand.
yeah. Yeah. So
Well,
if there's something existing, that would be ideal. If we can't find anything good, like I said, it's probably worth at least floating by iPerf 3. I mean, I can't imagine it's too different than setting.
well, I'm also pushing that what's needed is a tool.
Yeah. Okay.
A a tool that, a network engineer without, that can't do is his own coding can, throw a few packets around.
Yeah, that'd definitely be the way to do it. And
Yeah.
even, I mean, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, like iPerf 3 we build because we like to have the latest of that. But either tools that we've built ourselves or um, or related things like, OAMP and TWAMP, we build that because we need to distribute it. If you build something and you want to contribute it to the project, that's great. I think in a lot of cases, we probably wouldn't have any problem with packaging it up and distributing it just so it's available. Because we do.
And one of the
Go ahead.
for the broader community, one of the things that might be interesting is um, you know, um, uh, LHC is using the V6, currently using the V6 flow header, but some of the things being kicked around for that to replace that and do something more appropriate is with an extension header.
Yeah, which would make sense why that needs to
Yeah.
be verified.
But if you're going to go there, we need to have a lot better information about, can you get V6 extension headers through even the RNE networks, let alone the internet?
Yeah. Yep. No, yeah. And again, that's sort of totally our, our
Yeah.
raison d'etre is to,
Yeah.
is to integrate those tools and make it easy for people to use them.
Uh-huh. Okay.
So if the LHC starts using it, then we're going to have to integrate it.
Got a good follow-on question to that related to tools and
Sure.
integrating maybe new tools. Has maybe someone's already done this before, but it seems like, testing between perfSONAR nodes is a well-trodden, well understood, use case. What about extending that so that, in cases where you can never have enough perfSONAR nodes, there's always that, oh, I wish I would have had one over here, and so it's usually based on trouble calls, right? You get a complaint and you're like, well, I was blind in that area. Shame on me. So our network appliances, our routers and switches have a lot of capabilities for reflecting test traffic or participating in TWAMP. I'm thinking about things like RFC 2544 test reflectors, specifically because if our routers initiate 2544 test traffic, they're limited in bit rate. But if you ask them to reflect someone else's 2544 initiated test, they can do it at line rate. And that
Yes.
scales really well. So is anybody doing that? Are they integrating like 2544 test origination to third-party reflectors out in the field like routers?
I haven't heard of anybody doing that. The only thing that comes close, RNP down in Brazil has an arrangement on some of their systems where they have, and I could probably put you in touch with somebody there who understands it better than I do. But essentially, they basically have a thing that loops traffic back around. They use it for I guess for verifying new lines and stuff for their members. And one of the things that we did to support that, So actually, let me go back a step. So we have kind of two testing modes, as it were. You have things that are single participant and things that are two participants, where you have to have two personas involved. So, for example, like the round trip time measurement, you only really have to have one persona involved, because it just has to send the ping, and the other end doesn't matter if you're pinging one of your routers or Google or another persona node. The other end participates just sort of by virtue of the fact that it has a TCP stack, or an IP stack in this case, I guess. Um, Whereas for things, and most tests are like that. So round trip time, trace, the latency tests were built that way intentionally, so that if there are systems that have OWAMP or TWAMP servers that are not per sonar nodes, you can still hit those as well. So there is some of that. But what we did with throughput for what R&P wanted to do, essentially what the way they do it, the way they were doing it, and they sort of had like I guess it was a scripted arrangement to do this by hand manually, or not manually, but in an automated way. What they would do is they would run two copies of, say, iPerf 3 on the same host, and have one just would send it out to the router at the other end, which would kind of turn it around and send it back to the listening one on the same host and the addresses look different. So
They
what we
they presented, I'm sorry to interrupt, but they did present
you
at
know I think you're right, come to
Tech
think of it.
Advantage in Boston, and I was really
And
intrigued
I
by
should
the
I should remember
other.
that, because it was last year. I may not even been in that
Yeah.
session.
And so
But
what they're
anyway,
doing is programmable switches. And so that layer two pipe that you're talking about that the iPerf traffic would traverse is not maybe generally available to most networks.
yeah, and I can't remember. Yeah, RNP told us about this years ago, and I probably wasn't there when they were
Just
they were talking
imagine
about
like
this, but
all of Brazil is a whole big pile of switches,
yeah,
and they can VLAN tag however they want.
okay, yeah,
And they use P4 programmable switches to make it a little bit more manageable, but
mhm,
they're orchestrating VLAN tags on thousands of ports across the whole nation.
okay.
Um, I I'm glad I don't work there. That's They deal with some really hard problems, and managing that kind of environment's not easy. So kudos to them. But for those of us that have networks that look a little bit more like
Conventional.
conventional, yeah, we're left with the tools that our vendors are providing us. And so I'm looking at the features that the routers that are in the R&E community support, and like in the campus space, I would say yes, RMP. I think there's somebody in North Carolina that's using P4 programmable switches to do to load balancing across the campus edge of firewalls, which I thought was amazing. But in the core of the regional networks, there's a little bit less of that type of tooling, I think.
Yeah. And one other thing as well that I should mention is that we are not bound just to layer 3. So if there are, and there are some layer 2 tools out there, we basically haven't seen enough demand to integrate them to do that work.
Okay,
And for us, those things, we prefer to have somebody who understands the tool, and we understand our end of it, and we kind of work together with those people. Because it's better. Yeah, we end up with a better result if you have somebody who understands what we're helping to integrate to kind of point us in the right direction.
sure. Yeah,
So yeah, so I mean, if there are other tools out there, that do layer 2 or anything else like that look interesting, holler by all means.
okay.
You know, um, but yeah, as far as sort of the conventional layer 3 type stuff, I mean, a lot of routers have TWAMP servers on them and that sort of thing, if you want to measure latency and whatnot.
I was thinking the bandwidth reflector would be kind of fun.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, if the and I'm not super familiar with 2544, but I pulled it up while you were talking, and I'll take a look at it after we finish.
It's a really just, basic packet blaster. Like
That was
single.
like a bent pipe sort of thing.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
not really
okay.
fancy. Like there's newer replacements of it that are more fancy, that do multiple flows and more accurately mimic maybe real world traffic, whereas 2544
It's primarily a bit error rate tester, if I remember right.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Exactly.
Okay. Um, Interesting. Yeah, and again, if there are tools that use it that we don't know about, which is entirely possible, um,
Yeah.
then by all means, introduce us to them and we'll have a look at them. As I said, we're not, I mean, we're not even constrained to testing network stuff. I mean, we could write plugins to measure stock prices if you wanted to.
Nice.
So yeah, not that we do, but because there's plenty of other stuff to do that. But it's the architecture is very open in that respect.
That's really good to hear because I think a lot of what I'm hearing from our members as well as other regionals around the state, around the country, is that there's more and more requests for well, I guess I should say the network accountability of of the network operators has gone up over
Mhm.
time. It's no longer okay just to say, well, our regional network is not your problem, it's somebody else's problem. The members don't care whose problem it is. They just want Azure
They
to
want their
work.
stuff to work. Yeah.
Right.
Well, and
So
the other thing too is, and I'm sure you've probably seen this, where you have maybe a loss problem, and there are three networks involved, and none of them individually is causing it, but you lump them together, and you get
it's
enough
the
loss to,
perfect storm.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So I
Well,
mean,
yeah,
there's
in fact, that's the perfect thing for perfSONAR because, like, well, if we all test our stuff and it's fine, but it still doesn't work, what's going on?
yeah, you need to start end to end, and then start ruling
Yeah.
pieces of it out. Um, which is kind of what we recommend. So. But yeah, in short, by all means, if you develop tools to do things, or you know of tools that do things that you need measured, by all means, drop the development team a note, because I
So
have
if those tools were like more application layer monitoring kind of stuff, like
we can do that sort of stuff too.
if we wanted to throw a SIP monitor at you that could, monitor the
Oh,
stats
like
and
voice call
specs
quality.
on voice call
Yeah,
stuff.
that's entirely doable. The only real restriction is that we have to have something that we can run programmatically and get results out of.
Okay.
Doesn't even have to be machine readable. I mean, the thing, our tool plugins for trace route and trace path and all that actually parse out the human readable stuff that those programs produce. Um, so we kind of noodled it out, and once we did it, we turn it into something that can be machine processed. So it's not rocket science.
That's exciting. I
Yeah,
think
it's
that
fun.
could take perfSONAR into the next 20 years.
Yeah, and that's I mean, it was one of those things. When we designed P-Scheduler, one of the things that was sort of big on our list was what I like to call the 10-minute rule, which is if it's true now, it probably won't be in 10 minutes. So design accordingly. Um, so that was sort of um, one of the things that we wanted to shoot for, and so far it's actually served us pretty well. So hopefully we're I think we're I think I started I st the first bits of P schedule were written I think in the fall of 2015. And if we get another 10 or 15 years out of it, I'd be very happy.
I will just also to add that sometimes if you're looking for like summer student projects or just student projects in general, the P-Scheduler tools can sometimes be a good candidate, especially if like the underlying command already exists. We've had some good success like out of the University of Michigan and things with student writing tools and stuff like that. And there's some SDKs and things like that and templates that have been developed that they can start from to help with those. So
All right. Anyone have anything else?
good discussion so far. So
Yeah, I'm actually pretty excited to hear that people are interested in new tools, because that has always sort of been like my thing. I've always, I'm always looking for new things to measure, and I don't want to just like write things and throw them out there, because it's kind of like throwing darts at a dartboard blindfolded. You might occasionally hit the thing you're after. And I think, and then I don't know if it's maybe there's just sort of people look at perfSONAR and they go, okay, it does what it does, and either they don't know that we can do new things, or or don't know who to ask or whatever. But yeah, I get real excited anytime we add a new measurement. I guess if nobody has anything else, we could wrap up early. Or Phil could dig out that curveball that he's been saving for the end. All right. Well, hearing none, what do you say we wrap it?
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Yep.
So,
All right. I believe we have one more of these scheduled for August. I
May,
have to
June,
look at
July,
my,
August. Sounds about right. Yeah.
hold on, let me look at my planning list here. Yeah, we have another scheduled for the second week of August, so that'll be August 8th. And then we have the last one of the year scheduled for October 24th. So those will be the next two that are coming up, but certainly everybody should know how to contact perfSONAR at this point. I think Andy put the email list in the chat. If not, somebody can put it in there. And then you
And
guys
that's
use your
on that's
Slack.
on our website as well.
Yeah.
So
And you use your Slack channel too, right? People can just join that and ask questions there too.
yeah, we actually tend to reserve the Slack workspace for development. So
Okay, then ignore what I just said.
or if you happen to know either of us in another workspace, feel free to poke us. I get things on the SINET Slack all the time.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for the good questions. I will make sure I post this video. And then back to that schedule. We got a little bit of a gap here for the Memorial Day holiday, so 2 weeks off. And then on June 6th, Doug Southworth and Brian Tierney from TAC are going to be talking about NetSage. So hope everybody has a good break at the end of the month, and we'll talk to everybody in June. Bye all.